So welcome back to Managerial Accounting, and I have a little job aid here. It's Chick-fil-A cow, and he says, eat more chicken. And my whole house is filled with these things because my brother, the big chicken, has been a Chick-fil-A franchisee in the Raleigh area for over 44 years, I believe it was. I think he recently retired. And he always would come to the house, and whenever he'd come to the house, he'd always leave me, particularly in the early years, some type of Chick-fil-A paraphernalia. So I've got chicken hats, I've got these chicken bobbleheads. He used to put something on the chicken on the top of the antenna on my wife's car, things like that. So why do I mention the big chicken and my brother? Because I want to just finish up our discussion of Chapter 10 with franchises, franchisors, which would be Chick-fil-A, and franchisee, which would be my brother Charlie, on the big chicken. So let's talk a little bit about, just pull this up. Yeah, here we go. So we've got the franchisee. That's the person who gets the right to market a company's product or services. So my brother, the big chicken, is the franchisee. The franchisor would be Chick-fil-A. So that is the company that provides the franchise. He paid a fee to buy the franchise, I think back in the late 1970s. And then going forward, he has to share with them a percentage of his sales. He has to invest in the property and the equipment to deliver the product or service. And then the franchisor provides the startup, the advertising, the management development business systems, and supplier relationships. So remember, we talked about the DuPont formula. So you might say, well, why would a company get involved in franchising its operations? So the big benefit to the franchisor is the ability to expand without investing significantly in property and equipment. So you get the franchisee to make the investment in property and equipment, and then you provide basically the management and the name and so forth. So what you're able to do when you think of the DuPont formula, you're able to have a very high profit margin, and you have very little investment. So if you've got very little investment, you've got a very high investment turnover. So let's take a look at an actual example here. And this information that we're using here comes from the segment reporting. So companies are required, if you go to the annual report, to have a segment disclosure, which means they need to disclose the different parts of their business and provide additional detail to investors about that in one of the footnotes of the financial statement. So this is taken from Hilton Holdings. Hilton Holdings, the big hotel company, and they have both company-owned hotels and they have franchised hotels. So you'll see the Hilton name on many buildings that they don't own, and that's because those people, those have been set up as a franchise relationship. So the segment disclosures in the annual report shows the following. So for company-owned stores, or company-owned locations, for Hilton, they've got revenues. This is probably in billions of dollars here. 1422. They have operating expenses of 1254, and they've got administrative expenses, which are mainly related to the franchise operation, of $44. And of their investments, they've got 90%. They got what 12,816. Again, these are probably in billions worth of investment, and that is 10% is in the franchised operation, and 90% is in the company-owned operations. So when we do the DuPont formula here, we want to get the profit margin, and we want to get the asset turnover, and that would give us some insights in terms of how profitable the franchised operations are compared to the company-owned operations. And you know that for the franchise operations, they're going to have very little investment in that because most of the investment is going to be done by the franchisees. So we're going to take these numbers here and we're going to crank them into the DuPont formula. So here's the DuPont formula. We remember profit margin times investment turnover. And profit margin is operating income divided by revenues, and investment turnover is revenues divided by invested assets. So if you look at the company-owned hotels, you had 1422 for revenues, you had operating expenses of 1254, and you had administrative expenses of 44, and here was your investment in assets of 11574. So to get the return on investment, so first of all, we get the operating income. So 1422 minus 1254 minus 44. That's where we got the 124. And here is the 1422 is the revenues. See, there's the revenues right there, 1422. All right, so we've got 8.7% profit margin. And our investment turnover is quite low. I mean, those hotels are quite expensive. So take the revenues, divide by the amount invested in assets, and they've got a very low ratio there. The ratio there is 0.12. So they've basically got a 1% return on investment, which is actually pretty low because of all their big investment in the hotels. Now, contrast these to the franchised hotels where the franchisee actually owns the hotels, which means that the Hilton has very little invested in those. So the return on investment here, get the operating income is just 2243 minus the general and administrative expenses of 396, and the invested assets are 1286. So here's your operating income, 1847 by getting calculated by 2243 minus 396. Here are your revenues, 3243. So this is the very high. This is very typical. I know it's not only this high. This is very typical for franchised operations here. We've got a very high return on investment. And look at the turnover, the investment turnover. We take the sales of 2243 and we divide by the investment of 1286, and that's 1.74. So you've actually got a return on investment here of 143%. So when you look at the contrast between franchised operations and company-owned operations, doesn't always be this 1% compared to 143%, but generally the companies will have a higher return on investment on franchised operations. Okay. So that's it. So basically, at this particular stage, you want to be able to describe, with regard to Chapter 10, describe the advantages and disadvantages of decentralized operations, prepare a report for a cost center, a profit center, compute and interpret the return on investment and residual income for an investment center, describe and illustrate market price, negotiated price, and cost price approaches to transfer prices, and describe and illustrate the use of profit margin, investment turnover, and ROI for evaluating franchised versus company-owned stores. Okay, so that concludes our discussion of Chapter 10. Go ahead, if you haven't done so already, get the homework done, and if you're still behind, catch up with the rest of the homework, and I will see you on Tuesday. Be well, everybody. Adios, hasta luego, au revoir. Have a great weekend, and look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Do remember to catch up on the homework. Bye-bye.